Today on Inside Utah Politics, Senator Mitt Romney joins us on the show from Washington. What he's saying about Ukraine, the bird flu, and America's influence across the world. Helping veterans suffering from nuclear radiation and the sickness it causes. How a documentary on Downwinders could change legislation. House Speaker Mike Johnson keeps his job. See how lawmakers on both sides of the aisle help save the Speaker from a call to oust him within his own party.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
And thank you for joining us here. I'm Brian McElhatton. Let's go inside Utah politics. And we begin with Senator Mitt Romney joining us this week from Washington. Senator Romney, welcome to Inside Utah Politics. Glad you're here this week.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to join you.
I want to ask you about foreign policy. That's our first topic today. You were recently at the McCain Institute's Sedona Forum. You were moderating a discussion with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And I want to play a clip to tee up my first question for you so our audience can hear. Let's roll that tape if we could.
Your perspective on Ukraine, there are, in my party, there are people, and I do not understand the argument. I got to be honest. I do not understand how anyone can argue that we shouldn't provide weapons to Ukraine. I can't. I listened to they've changed their argument over time from one, the Europeans should do more. Well, the Europeans are doing more. We don't have enough resources. We go from argument to argument. But more recently, it is that there's no way for Ukraine to win.
Okay, so to your point there, Senator Romney, we know there's been a lot of pushback from some in your party, your colleague, Senator Mike Lee, particularly on aid to Ukraine. What do you make of that opposition?
Well, I respect other people's points of view. That's the nature of our political system. I find it hard to understand an argument that suggests that we would not stand with a sovereign nation, that we have committed to help support their sovereignty. We agreed to do that back in the 1990s when they gave up their nuclear weapons. For us to walk away from that and to walk away from the defense of freedom strikes me as being a very bad miscalculation on the part of our nation if we were to do that, in part because we do well in a world where there is freedom and democracy and where people can buy our goods and services. We've done well as a nation over the last 25, 30, 40 years, and walking away from like-minded people would be a mistake.
Well, you're on the Foreign Relations Committee. You watch these international events happening all the time. You're briefed by experts. I'm curious about your opinion here. There's an expected Russian offensive this summer. Are you concerned about how Ukraine might perform then?
Well, there's no question but that Ukraine is going up against a massive superpower. And is an underdog. There's no question about that. I think a lot of people, even in our own government, felt that Ukraine would collapse in the first few days of the Russian invasion. But they have performed extraordinarily well. Their leadership was strong. Their people were determined and courageous. And all they're asking for from us is the weaponry that in many respects we promised we'd provide. And it's in America's interest to see Vladimir Putin get the message. You can't invade your neighbors. And if you do invade, there'll be consequence. I can't tell you that the battlefield will be won by Ukraine, but I can tell you that if we were to shrink from providing support to a nation that wants to defend itself, then no nation in the world would believe us anymore. And Russia would invade their neighbor, another neighbor, Poland, a NATO nation. We'd be committed at that point to send in troops to help defend Poland, other NATO nations that Putin might invade. So keeping our own troops out of harm's way is a high priority.
Are you concerned after the election, if there is a change in the administration, that we could see less support or no support for Ukraine?
Well, I think President Trump, were he to come to power again, I think that's more likely than not. Were he to be president again, I'm sure he would want to encourage Ukraine to negotiate a settlement. And at the same time, he'd probably want to encourage Putin to negotiate a settlement. Some reports would suggest that he would say to Putin, hey, you've got to agree to pull back your troops from invading Ukraine. Perhaps there's going to be a division of some kind of land. But if you don't do that, we're going to provide even more offensive weapons to Ukraine and put Russia at greater risk. So there are a number of possibilities that a new president could put in place. But it was critical to me, in my view, that we and our colleagues did what we did do, which is overwhelmingly vote to provide weapons to a people that want to defend their freedom. Because if we don't do that now, we're going to find ourselves being drawn into conflict elsewhere in the world.
I would want to widen our attention now around the world, and we're watching the U.S. push out of Niger. The Russians are now filling that vacuum there. We're seeing the Chinese increase their presence in Africa and across the Pacific as well. What do you make of America's position in the world, and do you worry that we're losing influence?
Well, there's good news and bad news, which is we've not been paying as much attention to Africa and Latin America as we could have and should have. And China has been making inroads there. They've invested roughly $1 trillion in the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, and they've done that to gain influence, and that's been successful for them. We haven't been making that kind of investment in those nations, and we're certainly not going to. So we have to fight with our beliefs and our principles. And in some places, we've done well doing that. So, for instance, our friends in Europe are much stronger than they were before. Our friends in Asia, in the Philippines, in India, in South Korea, in Japan, these nations have come together in ways that many people hadn't expected they would. They become stronger. They're making bigger investments in their own militaries. That's a good thing. They're depending less on us as a result of making those investments. So in some respects, the cause of freedom has gained strength over the past few years. But certainly in places in Latin America and in Africa, we've seen some backsliding as people have fallen into the easy path of authoritarianism and dictatorships.
So here's where my next question comes in. The State Department. I think the fiscal year 2025 budget request was a little over $10 billion. As you know, that's a fraction of what we spend on defense in this country. Do you think the State Department, do you think the government should bolster the funding for the State Department and double down on diplomatic efforts?
The State Department, I think, has sufficient funds for them to man our embassies and to communicate our principles to people around the world. Putting a lot of money into the State Department would be to try and compete in some respects with China. I don't think our government should be doing that. I think instead we should create incentives for our private sector to consider investments in other parts of the world. And if we were to, for instance, make it easier to mine some of the materials that go into our automobiles, into our batteries and so forth, we'd find American companies and Western companies generally willing to go into other places in the world and mine some products, provide jobs for people locally. So not the State Department's role, in my opinion, to become a major investor of a financial nature in other parts of the world.
Yeah, open market commercial diplomacy, I guess you could call that. I want to now turn our attention to the H5N1 avian flu. And there's a tweet that I want to show our audience. You tweeted this a few days ago, critical of the federal government's response so far. You said federal agencies have been caught flat-footed in understanding and containing the bird flu virus outbreak. The administration needs to move swiftly to get ahead of the situation and reassure Americans that they and their food supply remain safe. Where do you take issue with the government's response so far, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, first of all, you would have expected that the lessons that we learned with COVID, as well as the lessons on the baby food shortage, would have led our various government agencies to say, we need to be able to collect better data, look at trends in data, identify threats before they become severe. But that hasn't happened to the degree I'd like to see it. So with regards to the so-called bird flu, we have the Department of Agriculture that's doing some work. We have the CDC, which is doing some work, and other agencies as well. But the coordination of their data gathering has not been as extensive as I'd like to see it. They haven't been able to communicate yet to the American people that they're fully on top of this terrible condition. And as a result, a lot of people are frightened. And fear, of course, can create challenges and harms to American people. So, I want to see the federal government come back to us with a complete report on what they're doing to make sure that we're gathering the information we need from ranches, from states, from communities across the country, to make sure that any threat from bird flu has been identified early enough that we can prevent it from a spread or, heaven forbid, entering into our food system.
Well, should that worst case scenario happen and this virus mutates in a way that facilitates easy transmission among people, are you confident America is ready to deal with another outbreak or pandemic again? There's still a lot of people who remember COVID-19. They don't want to wear masks. They're understandably, in some cases, critical of the way government intervenes there. So how do you feel about America's readiness for the next one, whenever that comes?
Well, I would anticipate that we'd be a lot more ready than we were last time around. At the beginning of any kind of pandemic, of course, people don't know exactly how it spread. They don't know how they can prevent themselves from catching it. And so basically it's, belt and suspenders. Everybody tries everything. Some things turn out over time to be more effective than others. I do believe that with regards to a viral epidemic of some kind, that the vaccination experience that we had with COVID will provide insights for the development of vaccines for something that would come along. I don't think that's going to happen with bird flu. I certainly hope it isn't going to happen. I just want to make sure that we're gathering the information early enough and on a sufficiently comprehensive basis that we don't make the kinds of mistakes that were made in the early days of COVID. I mean, we remember being told, hey, everything's fine, only 5 people have it, this isn't going to go any further. That kind of misinformation obviously caught us flat-footed in a lot of ways. I think the American people are more prepared and more willing to trust their own instincts.
Senator Mitt Romney, thank you so much for talking to us here on Inside Utah Politics, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much. Coming up on Inside Utah Politics, the U.S. pausing weapon shipments to Israel, why some of our nation's top lawmakers are divided on the latest move. Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene triggered a motion to remove Speaker of the House Mike Johnson from his post, but that was quickly squashed by both Democrats and Republicans. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports on what kept Speaker Johnson in his job.
Republicans and Democrats say they largely banded together to reject Greene's long-shot effort because they're tired of political chaos.
Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant.
Despite broad opposition, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene followed through on her promise Wednesday to try to oust fellow Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Gave Joe Biden and the Democrats everything they wanted.
Greene had threatened Johnson with a vote on the motion to vacate if he advanced a foreign aid package with additional Ukraine funding. Congress overwhelmingly approved that bill, and President Joe Biden signed it into law last month.
Excuses like, this is just how you have to govern in divided government, are pathetic, weak, and unacceptable.
But Greene's effort ended soon after it began, when Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise called first for a vote to table the measure.
I have a motion at the desk.
The House voted 359 to 43 to allow Johnson to keep his job. Still, Greene had no regrets.
I'm proud of what I did today.
While Johnson was in good spirits after the vote.
Just another Wednesday on Capitol Hill.
And thanked lawmakers for their support.
The country desperately needs a functioning Congress.
That's why the House's top Democrat, Leader Hakeem Jeffries, said Democrats made the unusual move to help save Johnson's job.
We're just interested in making sure that the House of Representatives can continue to work in a bipartisan manner.
Democrats did not help save former Speaker Kevin McCarthy last year, and Republican infighting forced the House to be without a speaker for about a month. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
Well, this week, the defense secretary confirmed the U.S. is withholding a military shipment to Israel. And the move comes as Israel prepares for a military invasion of Rafah, despite U.S. warnings. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin has more on this.
The Biden administration is pausing a weapons transfer to Israel.
We are currently reviewing some near-term security assistance shipments.
At a Senate hearing, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed the U.S. put a hold on a bomb shipment last week. The reason, U.S. concerns the bombs could be used in Israel's invasion of Rafah, a Gaza city holding more than 1 million Palestinian civilians.
I think we should do everything possible to ensure that we're protecting for civilians.
Republicans are slamming the decision.
This is obscene. It is absurd.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham says pausing aid only puts a target on Israel's back.
If we stop weapons necessary to destroy the enemies of the state of Israel at a time of great peril, we will pay a price.
And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell accused the president of siding with Hamas sympathizers.
And the campus communists who decided to wrap themselves in the flags of Hamas.
Secretary Austin insists U.S. support for Israel remains ironclad. He told senators the U.S. will continue to ensure Israel can defend itself. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's been critical of Israel's leadership during the war, says he trusts the White House strategy.
I have faith in what the Biden administration is doing.
Israel's government calls the decision disappointing, but says its operation in Rafah is critical to defeating Hamas. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Coming up, nuclear downwinders. We're talking with a veteran about his fight to help those suffering from nuclear radiation and the sickness it causes, how he's fighting for veterans. Next.
Watching Inside Utah Politics.
There's a new documentary out right now that highlights the struggles of veterans and defense workers who suffered ill effects from America's nuclear tests in the Nevada desert. That film, called Downwind, was screened in Kayenta on Saturday, and now you can watch it at home. Here's a look.
I really cannot forgive our leaders, our politicians, for not addressing this. This has been a terrible pox on humanity.
No one ever warned us about the testing and what it would cause.
My family personally have died of cancer and other illnesses known to be plausible from exposure to radiation.
The headlines are coming in, did America kill John Wayne?
Where you watch the guy standing there with those glasses and you're going, really? So this is really going to work? You know, at the age of 7, 8, 9, you're not stupid.
Even all these years later, hurts to even talk about.
From 1951 to 1992, the United States detonated 928 nuclear weapons in Nevada.
That's why we need a safe place for my people.
We own that flag too. We own that flag too.
I am a patriot and an activist. I don't sit on my butt.
So in a very real sense, your work can and will bring us closer to a world free of nuclear weapons.
That was the trailer for Downwind, and our next guest is Dave Crete, chairman of The Invisible Enemy, the nonprofit behind that film. Dave is an Air Force veteran who has suffered the effects of that radiation himself, and now he's fighting for nuclear program veterans to get help. Dave, welcome to Inside Utah Politics. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
What a powerful film. What are you hoping that people take away from this? What's the overall message here?
The first thing that I hope will happen with Downwind and the things that we're doing is that it brings first an awareness to people so that they're educated on the issue. Because even for myself, I live in Las Vegas, and everybody in Las Vegas goes to southwestern Utah. People aren't aware of what's taken place, and being a veteran from what's called the Nevada Test and Training Range, it's an area where people don't know anything about, and they don't know what's happened, and they don't know about the effects that it's had on us, that it's had on the residents of the area, including Southwest Utah, Northwest Arizona, that there's a long-lasting effect. There may have been a bomb that was blown up, or in this case, almost 1,000 bombs that were blown up during the 60s through the 90s, and they think it's done. That's history. And the truth is that the radioactive element that was used lasts for 24,000 years. So it's a long-lasting thing, and it has had very negative effects on the civilian population as well as the military population that served out there. And because of the nature of the work that I did and those veterans that I served with being classified, the military denies that we were there, therefore we weren't exposed, with the result being that the illnesses and things that people are suffering are not covered by the VA. They're not considered service connected. And so the ultimate goal is that those that need help can get help, be it civilian or military, that should be a reasonable request.
Well, let's take you, for example. You worked at the Nevada test site for years. You suffered the ill effects of that radiation, tumors, and other health effects too. Can you give us a rundown of the effects it has had on your health?
So for me personally, I've had probably 25 tumors. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I just had a couple pop up on my head and forehead. I had one the size of a grapefruit removed from my back. I've got several others, and that's a very, very common result, very common condition that those that I served with have. My lung function is down to 67%, which I'm not trying to run any marathons, but it causes problems. I have 2/3 of the capacity of my lungs, so it's an issue. And the other issue is it impacts our reproductive systems, and it gets passed on to our children. So our children then have birth defects as a result of the exposure that we experienced while serving on the range.
So to help you and to help the other people who have been injured by this, who have died by this, to help their families, you are supporting some legislation. You're trying to get that supported and passed. Where do we stand right now with that?
The legislation is being drafted. That said, it's been being drafted for a while. It has been something that many in the government don't want, and I understand that. That doesn't give them the excuse to essentially hide us in plain sight. And the reason why I say that is where we worked was classified, what we did was classified. Our time on the range still is classified. And we're not here as veterans to tell anybody about what we did. We talk about the general area where we worked at some undisclosed locations within the range, but that the classification of what we did should not be the reason that people are dying from not being able to get the health care that they should get. And that's the literal truth. We're not a huge group of people, but our memorial list that we've put together since a year ago, since last May, we have about 325 names on that list. And the average age of death is about 65.
Wow.
That's not normal.
No, it's not. Dave Crete with The Invisible Enemy. The film is Downwind. You can watch it wherever you stream television. Dave, we're going to put the information on our website so people can learn more about you and help you if they're so inclined. We appreciate your time here.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you doing this for us.
Absolutely. Good luck there, Dave. And stay with us,
Thank
everyone.
you, sir.
More Inside Utah Politics coming up right after this. All right, that does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget to follow along with me on social media to keep up with the latest on local politics and to send me story ideas. Please do that anytime. And ABC4 is also on social media. You can follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at it, download the ABC4 News app. Headlines in your pocket wherever you are. Thanks so much for being with us, everyone. We'll see you right back here next week.